Professor Koche, Professor Koche had on several occasions discussed this aspect, philosophical research paradigm. But again, as I keep saying that it's very interesting in a PhD study that people join at different times in the year. So you'd find that somebody who is asking the same question today would have joined last week. And yet in the same group, we have people who have been here for the last 2 or 3 years. It becomes very interesting because whereas people are asking questions that other people have heard over and over again, it's good because those who have been participating in this forum for a long time and have gone through similar, discussion, you'll be able to, in fact, when such a discussion comes up, you'll be able to be of help even as we discuss. So today, I in response to that discussion we had, I thought that it doesn't do any harm for us to go back and find some few clips around the same for the purpose of helping those who are asking for help in that area. But then when we have few minutes in discussion, for discussion, then I would expect the people who have been in the forum for some time and who have a lot of information and knowledge now around the same area, would expect you to now be able to come up and discuss. But of course, again, I would like to say that a number of these clips we play, really, there are differences in what people do and formats of how people do things in different universities. But we try to pick something that is really very close to what we do in most of the universities here in Uganda. So for our colleagues who may be in other parts of the world, you're very welcome. And if things look a bit different, what happens in your part of the world, I want to say that there is always a way to find things. So I just want to invite you to join us as we look at this this issue of research paradigm and the research approach. Of course, I'll play a small clip in the end, but then these are the issues that came up in our discussion, the issues of different types of research paradigms, where we have interpretivism as one of the paradigms, and positivism, and of course, pragmatism. And so one of the things that we would want to answer is the definitions of what do each of these stand for. We talk about interpretivism. What exactly are we referring to? Positivism, pragmatism. We talk about these key terms. What are we referring to? But of course, again, as I said, that Professor Joseph Ntai and Professor Okoche, and I think at one point, Professor Laura had some discussion on this, and now you just go back to your notes if at all you're making some notes and be able to compare notes with from the clip. And of course, the other question is now, but how would we choose the appropriate research paradigm for the study? So all these questions, I would like to refer us to this clip. We watch it, and then from there we should be able to find answers to some of these questions. And what will not be answered, we have the professors and doctors who have logged very early, and they are available to help us find solutions to some of the questions that we may not get the answers from this clip that we are going to listen and watch. So welcome with me and listen to what this professor has for us this morning. Someone confirm if you can hear.
It's not. Yeah, Joseph.
No sound?
No sound, Joseph. No.
Okay. Let me first.
Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Welcome back to this class research methodology. In this chapter, I will be discussing.
Are we okay now?
It's now okay.
Thank you.
On research paradigm and approach. We had completed discussion. Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Welcome back to this class research methodology. In this chapter, I will be discussing on research paradigm and approach. We had completed discussion on overview of research, which is discussed and presented in chapter 1. In the last chapter, chapter 2, we talk about literature review, and we had discussed at length on the different types of literature review, and also we discussed on the development of theoretical framework. Prior to that, we also discussed about the different types of variables. If you can recollect, there are 6 variables that we discussed. Number 1 is the independent variable, dependent variable, mediating variable, moderating variable, control variable, compounding variable. 6 variables altogether that can be used to develop our theoretical framework. But of course, the theoretical framework, especially for the quantitative research, should be based on certain theories. There must be underpinning theories that we refer or use for the development of the theoretical framework. And that particular discussion on literature review is aimed to prepare us write our literature review chapter for our thesis. If you can recollect, I did mention this couple of times. In any given thesis report, you can expect chapter 2 is normally dedicated for literature review. But normally students who are under my supervision, I will split chapter 2 for literature review and also chapter 3 for the theoretical framework. But it is okay to combine both. It's just that for my style of supervision, I prefer to have the theoretical framework to be written in a separate chapter, not combined with the literature review chapter. And as of today, our discussion will be on research paradigm and approach. Research paradigm has a strong connection with the research methodology chapter that all of you will be writing for your thesis report. So in any given thesis or dissertation, you can expect to see chapter 3 or sometime chapter 4. The author will be writing on research methodology. So what we are going to discuss today in this chapter, which revolves around research paradigm, is closely or tightly connected to the research methodology chapter of your thesis. Okay, research paradigm. This is the content of this chapter. First, we will provide an overview about research paradigm, and then we will be discussing about research methodology, which is actually one of the premises of research paradigm. And last, we will be talking about induction versus deduction research. Okay, what is meant by research paradigm, or the word paradigm itself? A paradigm is a set of assumptions and perceptual orientation shared by members of the research community. So a set of assumptions upheld by researcher. So for any given phenomenon, when we want to embark on a research studying a phenomenon, we should approach and we should conduct the research by subscribing or following certain paradigm. In other words, we as a researcher at that particular point in time, we should have certain assumption that we are holding to in order for us to continue doing the research. So this assumption is very important because through this assumption, our method will be determined as well as our design. So if you look at point number 2 here, paradigm determines how members of the research community view the phenomena. How do we perceive, do we approach and understand the phenomena, what is our perspective about the phenomena, as well as how we should be choosing the appropriate method in order to study the phenomena. Okay, so this is being determined in paradigm. So as I have said, research paradigm is discussed in the chapter 3 of your thesis, in your chapter 3 research methodology. So you will start off presenting or discussing the research paradigm of your research. Now, a research paradigm will have a combination of the following premises. Okay, number 1 is epistemology, number 2 ontology, and number 3 methodology. Okay, what is meant by epistemology? Epistemology is concerned with what constitute to valid, acceptable, or legitimate knowledge. As a researcher, when we view a certain phenomena, we study the phenomena. What is our assumption uh, in terms of knowledge creation? Remember, when we talk about research, research is meant to contribute significantly to the body of knowledge. So what is our assumption with regard to valid knowledge, legitimate knowledge for that particular phenomena that you are studying? For instance, if you are studying about knowledge creation abilities of a knowledge worker, okay, in a certain context. Say you are studying knowledge creation ability in organization X. So prior to conducting that knowledge, what is your assumption that constitute to valid knowledge? Okay, what is your assumption and what is your belief to what constitute to valid, acceptable, and legitimate knowledge? And how this knowledge will be communicated to others, in what manner, in what format, in what form. Okay, so this is the meaning of epistemology. Our assumption, our belief about knowledge creation. Okay, what is our understanding and assumption with regard to valid knowledge for that particular phenomena, and then how this relate or communicated to other community. The second premise of this paradigm is ontology. Ontology refers to the nature of our belief about the reality. So researchers have assumption, sometimes implicit, about the reality. Basically, researcher can view a reality as comprising multiple realities, not singular, not one reality, but it comprises of multiple realities that very interconnected. Okay, on the other hand, researcher can also believe that reality can be singular, can be by itself one, and therefore the researcher view the reality as objectivism, meaning to say they view the phenomena as a single reality, and the researcher will approach to study the phenomena not immersing himself in the phenomena. In contrast, a researcher can also view a phenomena as having multiple realities. And therefore, instead of looking the reality as single, the researcher believe that these reality are multiple and they are interacting and has to be interpreted. Okay, this is what we call as subjectivism. Okay, so this objectivism, subjectivism, probably very strange to you, but actually you have come across this word, but in a different perspective. If you can recollect, when you attended final examination, or you went through exam questions, you notice there are questions in the form of multiple choice, and there are questions in the form of subjective questions, right? So these objective questions is the analogy of objectivism, whereas the subjectivism is the analogy is like the subjective questions in the final examination. It is open-ended, so you can perceive, you can look at things, from a different dimension, in a different ways, and in fact you can write anything under the sun. Whereas for objectivism, okay, it is very narrow and very specific. Okay, just like in the final exam, for multiple choice questions, you just have one answer. Choices are given, you have to choose the correct one. So you look at the phenomena as a single reality, whereas subjectivism looking at the phenomena as multiple realities. Okay, that is ontology. So when a researcher approach a certain phenomena, when he wants to study a phenomena, so he has to be clear on his paradigm in terms of epistemology, what he considers as valid, legitimate knowledge, and how is he going to perceive the phenomena, the reality. Is it going to be a single reality, or is it going to be multiple realities? Now, the third premise of paradigm has got to do with methodology. So methodology, by definition, is an articulated, theoretically informed approach to production of data, and guides the researcher in deciding what type of data is required for a study. So methodology is being broken down into one, qualitative methodology, number two, quantitative methodology, and number three, mixed methodology. So the third one, mixed methodology, is actually a combination of qualitative and quantitative methodology. So mixed methodology combines both qualitative and quantitative methodology in one single study. Okay, what is meant by qualitative research? Okay, methodology. So qualitative research methodology relies on method based on multiple meanings. Remember I said about multiple realities? That's why. So qualitative researcher will look at phenomena and having multiple meanings, okay, of individual experiences, meaning socially and historically constructed, and with the intent of developing a theory or a pattern. So a qualitative researcher, okay, a researcher adopting qualitative methodology will collect data, okay, understand the data, and slowly, gradually develop a theory by looking at the pattern, that pattern in the data that he had collected. So that is qualitative research. In contrast, we have quantitative research methodology, relies on method based on cause and effect. Okay, cause and effect. In natural sciences, normally we look at cause and effect. Social sciences, normally we look at relationship or association. Okay, based on cause and effect or relationship or association thinking, reduction to specific variables and hypotheses and questions. So the phenomena the phenomenon being studied will be measured, okay, through the lens of variables. So we look at the phenomena and then we will operationalize the phenomena into variables. Okay, we will measure the phenomena through the lens of variables. We will collect the data based on the variables that we have defined, and then we will test the data that we have already collected with the intent to test the theory. If you can remember, in our last discussion on the development of theoretical framework, we talk about theories, underpinning theories, supporting theories, conflicting or competing theories. Whatever it is, when you want to develop theoretical framework, you will refer to existing theory. So the theory that you had chosen will become the underpinning theory. So remember, when we talk about theory is meant to be tested. Okay, so you collect data based on the variables. In a quantitative research, you analyze the data, and then the data is meant to test the hypothesis, which is actually aimed for testing the theory. Okay, the next one is mixed method. So mixed method combines both quantitative and qualitative research methodology. So in a single study, you will adopt both quantitative approach. In other words, it's possible in a study where you have this testing of hypothesis, you will define variable, and then you will develop the measurement, you will collect data, and then you will test the hypothesis. At the same time also, either prior to that or after that quantitative research, you will do a qualitative research whereby you will be observing or interviewing, or you will be doing focus group. Okay, you want to understand meaning, experiences, okay, by the participants in the particular context of the phenomena. So mixed method normally takes advantage of the quantitative as well as the qualitative. So the strength for each and every methodology is being combined in this mixed method methodology. All right, let's move on to discussing what is meant by inductive and deductive research. Inductive research is a study in which theory is developed from the observation of empirical reality. Thus, general inferences are induced from particular instances, which is the reverse of deductive methods, since it involves moving from individual observation to statements of general patterns or law. Okay, so inductive research is where the researcher collect data, analyze the data, and see the pattern, and end up developing the theory. So that's inductive research. Deductive research, on the other hand, is a type of study where it conceptualizes framework which has variables, okay, and then this framework together with the relationship will be tested using empirical observation. So empirical observation here means you collect data, probably using survey, questionnaire, or you do experiment in the lab. Still you generate data, collect data. So based on the collected data, you will test the relationship between variables in the framework. So this is deductive research. Let's look the differences between this inductive and deductive research from a diagrammatic point of view. Okay, so if you look at this inductive research, okay, you started with an observation. You can interview, do focus group, collect document, analyze the document. So all the data that you have already collected, you will try to identify the pattern, and then you will develop tentative hypothesis. Okay, from there you will develop a theory. Okay, remember in our last chapter we talked about theory. There are so many theories, and these theories exist through the results of research done by researchers. So through inductive reasoning process, inductive research, researcher will develop theory. So in contrast, we have deductive research, deductive reasoning, whereby from the theory, you will develop your theoretical or conceptual framework. So the chosen theory can be one or two, will become the underpinning theory. So this theory will be used to develop your theoretical framework. So the connection, the relationship between these variables in the theoretical framework will be represented by hypothesis, which is meant to be tested through the data that you collected. So the data that you collect will be used to analyze or test the hypothesis that you have developed. So finally, the results will either confirm the theory, support the theory, or you will refute the theory. All right. So we have discussed the premises of paradigm. Let's recollect. Let's recall what are the three premises of paradigm. Number one is epistemology. Epistemology has got to do with our assumption, what constitute to valid, legitimate knowledge. And then we talk about ontology. Ontology is how we is about our belief, looking at reality, whether we look at a reality as a single reality, objective, or multiple reality, subjectives. Okay, and then the third one is methodology, which is also divided into three. One is the qualitative methodology, number two, quantitative methodology, and the third one is the mixed method methodology. So all these three premises combined together will form what we call paradigm. So paradigm has got three. Well, actually, if you refer to any other textbooks, researcher will describe or will categorize paradigm as having many. Some categorize into five. Some will categorize as minimum as two. Others will divide into four. So for the purpose of our discussion in this chapter, we will divide paradigm into three. Number one is interpretivism. Number two is positivism, and number three is pragmatism. Okay. What is interpretivism paradigm? Interpretivism paradigm is based on the assumption multiple reality, and therefore it has to be studied, okay, in a way where the researcher will interpret from different perspective or dimensions. Okay, that is interpretivism paradigm. That's why you can see the word interpretive there. Okay, so because interpretive researchers view social reality as being embedded within and impossible to abstract from the social setting, they interpret the reality through a sense-making process rather than a hypothesis testing process. So the reality cannot be detached, okay, from the context. This is the view of interpretive researchers, interpretivism paradigm. Okay, the second paradigm is positivism. So if you conduct a research that use positivism paradigm, you at that particular point in time is called positivist researcher. So as a positivist researcher, you have this belief of supporting this positivism paradigm, and this positivism paradigm is aligned with the hypothetico-deductive model of science. Hypothesis, deductive. Remember, we talk about hypothesis and then deductive, hypothetico-deductive. That means testing of hypothesis, model of science that builds on verifying a priori hypothesis. So you will develop hypothesis, and then you will operationalize the variables, and then you will collect data, analyze the data to test the hypothesis. Okay, and studies aligned with positivism paradigm generally focus on identifying explanatory association or causal relationship through quantitative approaches, where empirically based findings from large samples are favored in this regard. Generalizable inferences, replication of findings, and controlled experimentation have been principles guiding positivist science. Okay, so normally it involves a lot of samples or subjects. Okay, unlike in the interpretivism paradigm, the participants, the subject, the people are normally not many, whereas in positivism paradigm it involves what we call population, and from the population you have to take sample, and the sample should be representative enough. That means the number must be enough, the sampling technique also must be accurate, so that the chosen sample is considered representative. So based on the data that you analyze taken from this sample, it is hoped that the findings can be generalized to the entire population. So this is positivism paradigm. The next paradigm is pragmatism. Pragmatism paradigms offers an experience-based, action-oriented framework whereby the purpose of research is to help address the issues of dealing with how people experience and come to know the world in a practical sense. So the key word here is practical sense. How people understand, look at things, and then implement, apply in a day-to-day basis. Okay, so in the pragmatism paradigm, the focus is on the human capacity to learn, to reason, and make choices in our environment, to respond to and interact with our environment, and to adapt to it, modify it, and shape it in various ways. These are constant, dynamic, and ongoing processes. Okay, so this is the third type of paradigm, that is pragmatism paradigm. Probably the explanation and description is not easily understood by you. Inshallah, in our subsequent slide, we will try to relate with the method. In this way, you can easily understand what actually constitute to pragmatism paradigm. Okay, now let's review and summarize these three paradigms in terms of ontology, methodology, and also the strategy. Interpretivism paradigm, subjectivism, looking at reality as having multiple reality, not singular, and it has to be interpreted, right? And then positivism, objectivism, looking at reality as singular. Pragmatism combines both. So pragmatism researchers believe that the reality can be seen as both objectivism as well as subjectivism. Sorry, it can be seen as both objectively and subjectively. Okay, in terms of methodology, the interpretivism researcher will adopt the qualitative methodology, whereas positivism will adopt the quantitative research methodology. Pragmatism will combine both, so it is called the mixed method methodology. So it will combine qualitative methodology and also quantitative methodology. In terms of inductive or deductive, for interpretivism, if you can remember my previous explanation, interpretivism is regarded as inductive research, whereas positivism is deductive research. As for pragmatism, it combines both inductive as well as deductive research. Okay, let's look at the differences from the reality, from methodology again. Okay, interpretivism, multiple reality; positivism, single reality; pragmatism, okay, reality is constantly renegotiated, interpreted and interpreted. Okay, constantly renegotiated and interpreted. Okay, so pragmatism adopts the understanding that reality need to be interpreted, and the reality also can be measured and known. So the methodology will be qualitative for interpretism, quantitative for positivism, mixed method for the pragmatism. Okay, so this is another comparison between interpretivism and positivism. Remember, when we talk about methodology, we will also be talking about the method, and for each method we will also be talking about the design. For positivism, it is fixed design like survey, experimental design. Okay, whereas for interpretivism, it is quite flexible. As I will explain later, you will have different methods such as grounded theory, phenomenology, case study, narrative study. So it is quite flexible. You can also relate to the data collection technique. When you interview participant, okay, you will keep on asking and ask. You will do a lot of probing. Whereas fixed design, if you use questionnaire, you just distribute. Okay, remember we talked about this uh, cross-sectional, longitudinal. Okay, for fixed design, cross-sectional. Okay, a snapshot. Okay, whereas flexible design has got to do with the longitudinal data. You repeat collecting data from the same source. All right, so let's look at research paradigm versus method. Okay, I will not provide the detail for each and every of this method. In our subsequent chapter, we will discuss at length. But for interpretivism interpretivism paradigm, you have got 5: methodology, narrative, grounded, phenomenology, ethnography, case study. Positivism, you have survey, through experiment or quasi-experiment. Whereas for pragmatism, you have got either action research or Delphi technique. Okay, but sometimes action research can be positivism only or can be interpretivism only. Same goes to Delphi technique. It can be interpretivism only. But normally when it comes to classifying them, researchers always argue. Some consider this as pure qualitative, others say it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative. But for the purpose of our discussion, we will classify action research and Delphi technique as under mixed methodology, which falls under pragmatism paradigm. Okay, in order to test your understanding, I want you to do some exercise, learning activity. So besides the T paradigm that I have discussed, interpretivism, positivism, pragmatism, I want you to identify other paradigms that have been discussed in the literature and try to explain in terms of epistemology, ontology, methodology, the basic premises of a paradigm. Okay, thank you so much for your attention. We will see you in our
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of our clip. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you. I was just trying to look through my chat. So you're very welcome for some of you who joined us a bit late. We're trying to look at the issues to do with research paradigm. And as I said earlier, that this issue of the paradigm has been discussed over time, several times. And as I said earlier, that A number of professors have always addressed this issue of the research paradigm. And for some of you who have been in the forum for some time, you have been part of these discussions. But again, as I said earlier, over the week we had discussion with some friends, and some of the things that came out strongly was about the research paradigm. In the key question was, how do I even know which research paradigm I can adopt for my study? And this informed the choice of the clip that we have just watched. But usually when we watch some of these things, I always want to get feedback from you. Always want to hear from you. Is there anything you have been able to learn from this lesson that we have been watching? What is your take home in all this whole thing? And so I want right now to just stop here and listen and hear from you. What is that you have picked this morning from the clip that we have watched? The floor is open. I would really love to hear from you. If at all you've been able to learn something as far as your research is concerned. So I open the floor, and you could kindly unmute and speak. You can as well put up your hand. There is a section somewhere on your window there where you're able to put up your hand and I could see you. But if that is not possible for you, you can just unmute and share with us what is your take home this morning. I want to be sure that I was not in a class alone. It's possible people could have logged in and decided to sleep. You know, these are weird hours of the day where people struggle a lot with sleep. So I just want to hear from you. What is that you've learned this morning?
Hello.
Yes, go on.
Good morning, members. Actually, unfortunately, I got up when the clip was almost coming to an end, but it has a very important information. I like to do it and positivism and then so on and so forth. It helps us to segment our information according to the paradigm that actually we are using. And my very much interest is to have a copy of that presentation. I saw it was enlisting very, very key information that can help us not to get out of the room when actually we are making our presentation and even when we are actually writing our research, so that you know that you are on the rhythm of the paradigm that you have chosen. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome, my brother. Thank you very much. This gives me hope, and you know, it's possible that these hours are a little bit tricky. Can be there talking when people are already asleep. Thank you very much. Can I hear from somebody else?
Yes, Joseph.
Yes, please go on.
Good morning, Joseph and members. My name is Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed.
Yes. This is what I can say that I've learned from this my take home. A paradigm, according to the clip, a paradigm is just a set of beliefs raw assumptions about how the research should be conducted. And it is just basically a set of interrelated assumptions about the social world, which provides us with the philosophical and the conceptual framework for the systematic study that we want to carry out in the world. And according, when you understand well, we have been given three the major research paradigms, which is the positivistic, and then we have interpretivist, and then we have also the pragmatic. Now, when talk about the positivistic approach, you can decide to be quantitative, and if you want to be interpretivist, you can, or constructivist, you can be qualitative, but you can also decide to be both, which is the pragmatic, and that's a mixed method. And they were trying to look at all this. If we're talking about our questionnaires, are we going to have closed-ended, open-ended, or multiple choice? Now, it is up to the researchers to adopt which approach they want to use. Either they decided to be positivistic. Now, in this one, it means that you're going to use a deductive theory. If you want to be interpretivist, then it means you're going to be an inductive. But you can decide to have both, or you are programmatic, then you'll be inductive, and then you can also decide to be deductive. So that helps us. But also the other part of it, when from there, then it also helps us to understand which methodology are we going to use. So if you're going to say that you're going to because the research methodology, if you're trying to look at it in terms of the research design and the methodology, now you find out that it helps us basically to relate everything. If you're trying to look at your research paradigm and then which methods you're going to use, then it can help us to know which research design are you going to adopt. Either you're going to be, if you're taking up the positivistic approach, then you can decide to say my research design will be correlational, or otherwise you can also say my research design is going to be a causal relationship. But in all this, you need always to relate it to your different variables within your study area that you were trying to understand very well. So that now, it also gives us the methods, because if you're going to say that I'm going to employ, maybe I'm going to be quantitative, then you don't give us methods that are qualitative. If you say you're going to be positivistic and then you're going to be quantitative, then it means that we also expect that your methods should be in from there. You don't give us methods which are qualitative. So that one will help us to understand systematically that you have understood your area of study, the tools, research techniques, collect your data, and need to understand the data. So basically, that's what I have to understand. But then maybe the other part of it is that it helps us to, if you're going to be positivistic, then you must tell us properly where you're going to begin from. Are you going to begin testing theory? For example, if you're going to be positivistic and you're using that approach, then you know that you're going to develop a conceptual framework, you're going to formulate a hypothesis, then you're going to test, then you will be able to give us. So it means that the results can be generalized from a sample to a population of the respondents. And then that one can be able to help us to understand basically what research journey, what journey your research is taking. Okay, I can stop there and allow other members to also contribute. Thank you, Joseph, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. You have really attended the class. I'm very happy. You have given us almost the summary of the entire clip. Thank you, and thank you very much. As I wait to hear from the rest of us, we still have about 7 minutes to go. I'm just thinking about it. What are the implications for a study where you have contradictive issues as part of your research? You have you're telling us that there is lack of consensus in a particular phenomenon, and then your choice of the paradigm is positivism. What does this mean? Can we think about that even as we give the what we have learned this morning? Could that also be part of the things that we should be thinking about? I remember the presenter trying to tell us that when you talk about interpretivism, the ontological perspective there should be separate. And if you talk about positivism, the ontological perspective there should be objectivism. And now I have this situation where I have that lack of consensus as part of the things I've identified is the gaps that need to maybe expounded more. And now my choice of the paradigm is positivism. Can we think in line of that and try to find some responses? Okay, I'm still trying to look through my chat here and hear from you. We still have some time, and I see a hand up from Ronald from Busitema University. Ronald, unmute and speak to us this morning.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph and panel so much. I think the first thing is we must understand as the presentation has gone, the three forms of the paradigms. But as the presentation ended, there are more than that, than those three which already exist. But the biggest issue is we have to start by understanding the reality. And this reality is summed up within the problem or the situation that is prevailing on the ground. Furthermore, it's driven by the knowledge which you're pursuing. And as you've said, the implications of a study whereby there's lack of consensus, whereby there are different realities taking place and the individuals are interpreting it differently. It would be easy to say to go for interpretivism, but as I said, we have to understand the assumptions. And from what the presenter had presented, sometimes the focus may be, is it on the learning? Is it on how the situation is changing? And what is it that you want to capture? And I can see that when I Googled a bit, there are some other paradigms like social constructionism, where the truths vary, but they're socially constructed and they're ever changing. So that could be another approach a student could use to bring about that kind of situation you've put forward. But as our colleague Kassad has put it forward, Mohammed, we have to understand the reality first on ground, and that the three must be stringed together coherently and systematically. One must have epistemology that links up well with the ontology, and that must be reflected in the methodology as well. So there's that alignment that must be present. Otherwise, if one goes for positivism, it shows a lack of alignment, cohesion, and proper understanding of the reality and the philosophy behind. I submit, Brother Joseph.
Wow, thank you very much, Ronald. And let me see what is on there's some messages here. Sister Peace, why don't I invite you to really speak this that you've written? Please, can you, if you can? I have seen some nice information here. And okay, you're saying your network is poor, but this is what you're saying. You're saying that to add on Muhammad, if it's pragmatism, one needs to have a philosophical stance. For example, if one is on a success story, then the stance is positivism. Thank you. That's from Peace. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peace. I have many other people. They are asking for the clip. Yes, I'm going to upload this. Okay, I'm going to upload this. You should be able to get it shortly. We have just 1 minute to conclude this student session. And I really want to thank you very much for being part of what in this very fast 1 hour. And I thank you for your active participation. The more we participate, the more you actually able to learn a number of things, not only what has been shared on the clip, but also you learn skills, speaking, of how to speak. It's important. It's not only about having knowledge in your head, but also passing it. Once it's only when you pass it to others when we shall know that you have it. But if you don't, you remain thinking that you actually don't have it. But when you come out and speak it, then one, we benefit, but we also, it's for your own good as well, to be able to learn how to disseminate this information. Right now, I want to bring this session to the close. And thank you very much, all those that have been able to attend the student session. I want to thank you very much. And now, at this moment, allow me take this to Professor Michael Okoche. Thank you very much, and on to the next session. Professor Michael Okoche, are you on? Okay. Nice. Okay. Prof, are you having any challenge with your network? We seem not to hear you. Well, looks like Professor Michael Okoche is having issues.
Hello?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Somehow my network had a bit of challenges. But let me begin by thanking you. I don't know whether the session of the students is finished, Joseph?
Yes, we are done. We are done.
Okay, thank you so much. I thank you again for enlightening the critical concepts of our philosophy and paradigms and how critical they are for research. And I think the presentation really illustrated the critical aspects of determining the appropriate choice which you make when making a decision, whether you are going to use particular methods, either quantitative, mixed, or qualitative. Thank you also for the comments, which the people who have given comments. Like every day when I log in for the student session, you really see enormous growth and enormous understanding about critical issues. And I must thank you for the ably steering the early session and also the colleagues who attended that session. Let me take this opportunity to appreciate all of us who have been able to log in early morning for the the lecture, which is a continuation of the previous lecture. But before we move forward, allow me to acknowledge the critical senior colleagues who have been able to wake up early this morning to support us in the process of ensuring that we move forward together. Before I acknowledge most of the senior colleagues, I want to first begin by thanking Professor Joseph Ntai for this platform. I know it began some time back, but consistently every week we are learning. Every week we are able to refresh our knowledge. We are able to learn new critical concepts. And for most of us who were there last week, you could see how the concepts which were being displayed were very interesting. So, Professor, we really thank you so much. And I pray that God keeps on blessing you. And I believe that your good health today. Allow me to acknowledge the senior colleagues who are in the platform. Professor Laura Orobia, we really appreciate you, Laura, for the enormous support you give the student and the mentorship you give to most of the senior colleagues. I also want to appreciate Professor James Kagari. Professor, we really appreciate you and thank you so much for being consistent and waking up every morning to see that we support the learning process. I also want to appreciate Dr. Gideon Nkuzinza. Dr. Gideon, thank you so much for the support and may God richly bless you. I know most of the senior colleagues will be joining in. So I think it's very important that we continue from where we stopped last time. And I must say that there are a lot of concepts which came across clearly, and the Professor Joseph and the Bosco, I pray that you continue. I don't know how we shall move today, but I wanted to request that some of the people called me and told me that the concepts which are really being displayed are very interesting, and most of them they like them and they are new, and that will be good for you can move. Don't mind about the time, and try as much as possible. But I believe that we shall be able to move together. So, Professor, let me take this opportunity to invite you. And like I said earlier, that we are really blessed to have you and have you always steer the process of learning in this platform and Bosco. So, Professor, let me take this opportunity to invite you and Professor. Okay. Yes. We have also not seen Professor Andaramola. Is also with that. Professor, thank you. So let me invite Professor and the Bosco, please. And I know we shall be acknowledging more of the colleagues as they come. Thank you so much. Please.
Thank you, Professor Koche, and senior mentors and fellow colleagues on the platform. Professor Koche, I think Professor Ntai will make his remarks. He's still recovering from the health challenge he got last week, but we trust that he'll be well to be able to pick up from where he stopped. But he already briefed me here on how to get started. So,
Okay.
Prof, we shall, if you permit,
Okay.
we can start. Okay.
Okay, Bosco.
Thank you, Prof.
We shall keep on praying for Professor, but the request of most of the people was that the ones who called me anyway, they feel that you might not have to move very fast, because some actually told me that they're not very familiar with most of the concepts. So, but don't mind about the time. Yeah, please. Okay, but thank you so much. So Bosco, all the best, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. We shall try to recap on what we discussed last week and repeat a few things, then move to the next slowly a bit as you advised, Prof. Our intention would have been to do the analysis next weekend, then possibly run the software the following weekend and see the output. Or if we can do the two next weekend, it would be good. But if we go slow, then we might have to add some more space next, which I know will be okay. So we appreciate that of our Prof. To start with, Professor Antaya had already given the context of the fuzzy logic. It is also referred to as qualitative comparative analysis, and it operates three various approaches of analysis. And the three include the crisp sets, which ordinarily referred to as binary choice models or dichotomous models. And then we have got the fuzzy logic, which is more anchored under the fuzzy sets. And you will find most times they are referred to by their acronym. And the FSQCA is quite very common because it tends to cover a lot. It is more robust than the crisp sets. Because as you realize, these two approaches evolved. This one, fuzzy logic or fuzzy sets, evolved after the limitations of crisp sets became glaring. So this tends to cure and improve the binary choice models or crisp sets. And that's why this is quite more popular, more used. Multi-value sets are apparently still a new phenomenon of research, and it's not yet so much applicable, but it is what we shall also see today, what it entails. So the last weekend, if we did the recap, we did, Professor gave the context of the study, that the fuzzy logic tends to study complex phenomena, social phenomena, and most times phenomena that is not having clear data. It has ambiguity of information, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's need to understand the underpinning of the phenomena. This is where fuzzy logic tends to play a lot more. Then we did look at the assumptions that are guiding the study of the social phenomena, and there were three of them. We covered the causal, the equifinality, meaning that there are various ends to an outcome, various ways to arriving at a specific outcome. Then we had multiple causation, where we understood that there are various conditions that cause an outcome. In unison, together, they cause an outcome. And then we also looked at the asymmetric causation, in which case something that causes an outcome does not necessarily reduce the state of that outcome if that condition is eliminated. So it implies there are other conditions that cause the same outcome. And that's why this is more of a configurational. Configurational addresses patterns. It's more, it study the patterns of causation. And where professor was able to address us on the need to be careful not to imply the causal causation in experimental studies is different from this. This is configuration. It's more studying the patterns. How do the patterns, the conditions cause an outcome? So we look at that, and then we emphasized in the last class that the fuzzy logic in entirety and operates to understand the sufficient conditions. As opposed to variables, fuzzy logic deals with conditions. What condition cause an outcome? What conditions together as a pattern cause an outcome? So their first category of the conditions are the necessary conditions. And those necessary conditions are that which must be in existence for an outcome to be there. But through the application of the Boolean algebra, we eliminate those redundant conditions and arrive at the most critical conditions, the sufficient, those that are more sufficient to cause the outcome. That's when we now arrive at the sufficient conditions. Now, the sufficient conditions are the ultimate model that explains the cause of a particular outcome of interest. And then we also looked at the attributes. As you recall, Professor addressed us on this and indicated this is more established under the set theory. And you recall our elementary set knowledge, sets constitute elements, are constituted by elements. So these elements are the basis for which cases come into play. So cases become part of the elements of the sets. And the set constitutes elements that cause or elements that don't cause the outcome. So depending on the area of interest, sets are established in this direction. So we shall not go so much in the set theory, but we shall make hint in the next few slides on what it entails. And then we also did address our minds the fundamentals of the qualitative, the comparative analysis research design. And so we shall not go back to the detail of it, but in a snapshot, we are looking at having to transform data into truth tables through a means called calibration. Now, calibration is, in other words, the alternative meaning of measurement in other statistical studies. Instead of saying measurements, we are dealing with calibration of data. And so this is the recap of the last session. So we look at this today's session. We want to achieve a few things and see how we can build on to the last session. We want to appreciate the different types of sets and possibly how to measure them, how to calibrate them, in other words. So properties that characterize the set and their boundaries, because these boundaries are the basis for which we create the sets that eventually are used in the analysis. They are zones, and this calibration is through the process of inclusion and exclusion of sets or conditions from the various sets. And under 2, we're talking about calibration, which is the same. And then 3, we want to differentiate the approaches to calibration. There is direct and indirect, so we shall deal with the most appropriate. And then finally, we shall also look at the most applicable tool under this methodology is the truth table. Remember at the beginning, Professor indicated and highlighted our focus to the study of complex phenomena and which has not sufficient data. There is ambiguity, there is uncertainty, but we have to extract the data. So the qualitative comparative analysis methodology tends to enable us to extract data and measure it. Now the calibration is depending on which approach you are using. If it is crisp sets, it gives its standard measurement, the 0 or 1. Whereas if you are dealing with fuzzy set logic, then you have to establish, we shall have to establish the degrees of truth. And those degrees of truth fall between 0 and 1. And we will also have to establish the anchors. The anchors are the limits, the extremes, and the midpoint, which is known as the break-even, or the break is the point of ambiguity, as we had indicated last time. So depending on where the conditional set falls, the degrees of your assignment of the membership to a different set is a position of truth. And that constitute eventually a truth table. So we combine and compile after calibration a table that enables us now to run the analysis. Now, this is so critical because calibration is the most critical in fuzzy set analysis and logic, because it will determine whether you arrive at the good results. So as you recall, garbage in, garbage out. So this is where you input whether it is good or bad. So to the software run whatever you output based on the truth table. But we shall give a hint on what it is. So maybe a later time when we are running it, next week or the other, we'll see how the software will generate the output out of the truth tables. So the analysis is mostly guided, enabled by the Boolean algebra with the logic and or and not. These three are the most operational operators of the Boolean algebra in this context of the study. And so shall see how to apply them towards the last parts of this slide session and see how they apply. Then we have got an illustration of the different analytical steps or stages when calibrating. We need to have in mind the concept of our interest. So we have defined, in my study, for instance, I'm dealing with commercialization of biofuels. So the concept of interest is commercialization. And so of these biofuels. And so what constitutes the set? I indicated earlier that the study, the area of testing, the concept is the biofuel sector. And these are 3-4 categories. There's bioethanol, biogas, biomethane, and biodiesel. So we have all these as what constitutes our sets and my sets of study. So once I have the context, the concept defined, concept and its context. So I have defined commercialization and where I'm going to study the area of study. Then we shall now proceed. If I have that defined, the measurements, so I need to know the qualitative and the quantitative data that's available, because this methodology can actually run for you, can run for us and give us the results if you only have quantitative data. That's why it tends to combine both qualitative and quantitative studies. So you may decide to have, if you have quantitative data, you can still run it and get the patterns and configurations. If you have only qualitative, you may also be able to calibrate it and then proceed to run it in the quantitative approaches. So either way, you are safe to go. So what is the data available in order to operationalize my concept? But in this case, we're dealing with cases. And as you note, if I'm to deal with biofuels, I have already producers. Those are my cases I will be studying and I'm studying. So my producers, or dealers, or actors in all that sector will be part of that. Then I will calibrate. I will need to get the anchors. For instance, if I went out and I had the Likert scale questionnaire based, so I have a 5-point or 7-point Likert scale, that is the one that helps me capture the truth in the field. So I'll come back and calibrate based on the cases, and those truth value will eventually be able to give us the truth table as we shall be able to see at a later time. Then I'll run the diagnostics to be sure that the data I've captured is not skewed to either outside the midpoint or all above the midpoint. So the skewness will determine, sometimes guides on the allocation of your midpoint. So what we might have to note here is that the midpoint under the logic, fuzzy logic, is not necessarily the middle of the 0 to 1. It's not necessarily 0.5. There are various scholars that have recommended different ranges that we shall see eventually, depending on the skewness of the data, so that you don't find yourself having to analyze data if it is skewed to less than the midpoint, all of it, or all of it above the midpoint. So what is calibration? Friends, we have this noted as the most important exercise, because we tend to define the set boundaries. This is where we define the boundaries of the sets, whether to be included or excluded. These are the boundaries we're talking about. Then it tends to guide us in defining the concept that is at the heart of the analysis. And as we noted, the concept in my study, for instance, is commercialization. It's in the heart of analysis. Whereas my test ground is in biofuels, but the concept is in that. So calibration is a conceptual exercise. You need to appreciate the steps also that come with it. Once you've defined the concept, then the choice of the raw data for measuring the concept is what comes in next. Then your contribution, your attribution of the cases, because then you'll have the cases ready to be attributed to different sets. So this attribution is largely based on the qualitative anchors. We shall get to this. These anchors are the ones that enable us to determine whether this element belongs to a specific set or not. And then we can now move on to calibrate, to assign the members in the respective sets based on the membership scores. And these scores are part of the assignment of the numbers, the figures to qualitative data. And those scores range between 0 and 1. So you may find that your Likert scale, for instance, ranges between 1 the Likert scale points range between 1 and 7. So we will have to develop a mechanism of how to get this to align to between 0 and 1. And sometimes we use the means and determine the anchor point of the various questions or component of questions. So we may want to test this later, how it applies. And then also the membership scores, qualitative difference in kind between inclusion and exclusion. So sometimes the difference in kind may be just that you are either belonging or you are not belonging. It's like the crisp set, either existing or not existing. So it takes a 0 or 1, but there's the difference in degree that takes more of the logic, fuzzy logic, and that's where we need the crossover points. These are the midpoints, points of indifference. These are the points of ambiguity, where if an element falls in this point, it has no meaning. So we try to test that most of our data does not speak to the midpoint. And that's where we did the test for skewness. You may find that most of your data is speaking to the crossover point. Therefore, you will be speaking to meaningless data. So this is the reason we do the preliminary tests. So then when we have the finding, once we get to start calibration, we need to find the anchors to the raw data. And sometimes we focus both on the conditions and the outcome of interest. What exactly constitutes the outcome of interest is dependent on your research question. And maybe we also in terms of conditions, you recall at the last session, we emphasized that the conditions are guided by theory and empirical and literature. So conditions normally are derived from existing literature or theory that should be able to guide the study. So you test those conditions, whether they constitute or cause the outcome or not. The beauty about this methodology is that it tests both the existence, the cause of the outcome, or the absence of the outcome. That's what makes it interesting. So we could also use the cumulative field knowledge, which is more of literature review, literature knowledge, or case-specific knowledge. For instance, I am studying biofuels. I need to have known a lot about biofuels as my context of study. So case-based knowledge also is important to enable you calibrate. Then once we have calibration, we need to justify our decisions in the calibration exercise. Why did we choose this anchor point? Why did we choose such and such a midpoint? Why did we choose these cases? It takes us closely back to the qualitative justifications. And I know that even quantitative studies, normally we do the same. We need to justify decisions most of the time. There are some rules we need to follow, but most times the overarching rule is that we have to align ourselves with the theory that guides your study. Now, whenever we're calibrating, it's advisable that we have a trail of whatever is done during the calibration. And that's what it's referred to as being transparent. This transparency leads us to a set with high content validity. of the outcome of interest. So we will have this, and most researchers have looked at, actually they provided some of this in our next year, some of the interview guide, the calibration material, among others, just to be able to give a second opinion for the reader. So we also wanted to determine what are the types of sets. Sets, as we note, we are not going to deal a lot with the sets. What sets are what we shall give hints of what sets are in the next 2 slides or so. But on the overall, we are dealing with 3 categories of sets, as we already talked about: the crisp sets, fuzzy logic sets, and then the multi-value sets. But in this, so we don't have to go back to the basics of set theory sets, what constitutes, because we assume that one someone can read and pick up their own. So what is important to note is that in this methodology, sets are not variables. They are not treated as variables, but they are qualitative differences between. We need to establish the qualitative differences between the cases. So the labels that we choose for the conditions or the outcome of interests need to express the property that the members of the sets express. So in other words, the conditions, labeling of your conditions and labeling of the outcome should speak to each other. I cannot talk of costs and then talk of, when you talk of costs, then the outcome should be talking of inflation, for instance. So when you're labeling the conditions, they should label to speak to the outcome. That's what this is trying to address our mind. So we will not go back to review most of this, so just go through it faster since we have already addressed them. Crisp sets, binary, the value members 0 for non-membership, while 1 is for membership. Then the social phenomena naturally are captured in crisp sets. Either they are members or non-members. That's natural in the social phenomena. So you find some analysis you can run based on the crisp set under this methodology, while others you need to go to fuzzy set. This enables us to capture both the differences in kind. First, difference in kind is whether it's existing or whether it's not existing. Then to what degree does it exist? Or to what degree doesn't it exist? So these are the differences in degree between cases of the same kind. So remember, our anchor points are 0 to 1, between 0 and 1. They are not probabilities per se, but we need just to make this mention. According to literature, it's not probabilities, so to say, but you establish the degree of their existence between 0 and 1. So the fuzzy set logic is used if empirically information are more fine-grained. You need to have those degrees so that you capture the meaningful variation between the cases. So always this ranges between 0 and 1, 0 for none, and 1 for full membership, the full existence in a set. Full non-membership is a 0. So a 0 also plays an important role in the analysis. So it's not only 1 that you're looking, both speak to. The only point that doesn't play a very significant role is the midpoint, the crossover point, which is a 0.5. Remember, this is not the standard. So it can always move depending on which scholar you are relying on. We shall see the various recommendations in the few slides to come. Then cases with a set membership higher than 0.5 are more in than out. So once you have cases above 0.5, then they tend towards full membership. in that set. They are more into the set than outside. So when they are below 0.5, they are more into non-membership. So the more they tend towards 0, then they tend to being non-full membership, which means they have little input to cause the outcome. But we shall also assess the significance of that 0. So here, in most respects, we treat crisp sets and fuzzy sets as the same way in QCA, with subject to the exception rule of the excluded middle. So we shall get to know what this rule is about in a short while. So the third category of sets is the multi-value sets, which we noted at the beginning that these are not in the recent times applicable. Most studies have not captured it. There's still work in progress in this area that's not yet adequately sufficient to give us a basis to do analysis based on multi-value sets. Because in the literature that exists, it's understood that these capture the qualitative differences of more than one kind. In other words, the different types of outcome. So you have various outcomes of interest in one study. And that's a study that I'm not yet very sure of how it should be run. Instead of studying commercialization, you study various outcomes in the same study, for instance. So we can think of multi-value sets as you're having multi-crisp sets. You have several multi-crisp sets or several binary choice sets in one study. So this is the multi-value sets. And then multi-value sets are less commonly used. And this is the emphasis we noted, and their calibration is not fundamentally different. But so if you wish to attempt it as a scholar, it's also okay, but it doesn't take any change from calibration, the same between just as you do the crisp and fuzzy sets. Now, what is interesting is that the R package, the R software, can combine all these 3 sets and run them and give you results. That's the beauty about it. And then the main question to ask for each of these, however, is if you are to determine which one you want to use. First is to determine, are we interested in differences in kind? In degree, sorry. If it's in degree, then you mean you're going to deal with fuzzy set, qualitative comparative analysis, FSQCA. If it is degree in kind, difference in kind, then it means you're going to deal with multi-value. It should actually, sorry, this should be crisp set. I think I typed the wrong figure. Wrong. It's supposed to be crisp sets. If the answer to both, yeah, I think this is okay. This is correct. So if the answer to both questions is no, that you're not interested in degrees in difference in degree and a difference in kind, then you're interested in the binary choice. So you choose the crisp sets to analyze. So this is still okay. So then we have, what is the crisp set in that case? Calibrating crisp sets, it means that we're dealing with naturally dichotomous sets. There is no need to additionally calibrate this because these are already naturally given as 0 and 1. So there's no need to calibrate between 0 and 1 because calibration gives us the truth values. The membership scores should fall between 0 and 1, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 up to 0.8, 9, 0.10, I mean 0.9 up to 0.1. So once we have no need for that degrees of truth, then we only have a binary choice, which is a no and a yes. And these are naturally given dichotomously. So they are binary naturally. It's either yes or no. It's either 1 or 0. So you don't need to calibrate it further. You only give those anchors, yes, 1 and 0, and you proceed to analyze. Sometimes we calibrate this sets by recording one or several empirical indicators. So then set an anchor, and then we deal with R. R will run for us that analysis. The various ways of calibrating these sets are offered by R. Okay, so we can just go through a bit about fuzzy logic. We noted that it's an establishment of the set theory, and it's a branch of mathematical logic. And it seeks to study the sets or collection of cases of interest. So through the minimization and maximization concepts, which are deployed by the Boolean algebra. Apparently, the advanced level of Boolean algebra is called Euclidean algebra. And that enables us to test the F statistic, F values at a later time. That's for another stage of analysis. We deployed the Euclidean algebra to do that. But for the purpose of our study, we concentrate on the normal algebra, Boolean operators, normal Boolean algebra. And that includes the AND, OR, and NOT operators. So what do we call a set? Is the collection of an unordered collection of cases. As you recall in our basic set mathematics, they referred by this. The detail of a set, how it operates is that when we talk of maximization and minimization, we're simply addressing our mind to intersection, minimization, intersection, and then the union of sets. So we are interested in minimization because then we want to determine the sufficient conditions. What are the minimum possible conditions that can give us the most outcome, the minimization? This ultimately gives us the model, the ultimate model that we need to explain the phenomena. So these operators work such that we assume the domain U. These are the issues of the sets. Two sets A, B, assume this, the union is this, sets B shall be the union given by this. So we don't apply this as it is in its literal expression. We will apply it in terms of the Boolean algebra. But for us to appreciate what we will be doing, this is why we thought we would reflect a bit on the intersection. While intersection of A and B is normally defined by this intersection, if you remember that P5 or P4 mathematics, this is what we are relying on to explain phenomena. So then in this we have sets under the set principles, the set theory. There's set complements. These are sets that these are elements that are not part of the union set. Equally relevant to the application of the fuzzy logic as they support the assessment of the outcome solution based on the presence or absence. So as we noted earlier, this method enables us to test the presence or absence. And in most cases, the language in here is not absence, but it's negation. Once we have found negation, it means the absence. So we deploy the not, the operator not. It's not existing, not present. This is also the basis for determining the sufficiency and necessary conditions. So once we find out what is minimized, the intersection, that which is sufficient, then we shall have arrived at the outcome of interest, the model. It also enables us to determine the necessary conditions, because this we deploy now the union sets, which are these conditions that exist to support the existence of the outcome. For instance, if the complement of the set A implies that the set of elements that belong to the union set are those, but not those that belong to A. So those that are outside A are the complements. Through the set principles, the fuzzy logic is able to guide the construction of the truth table. So these set principles we establish are the basis for which now we are able to deploy the sets, the elements in the various sets, and accordingly determine the construction of the truth table. Recall we said truth table is the operating tool that enables us to run the analysis. So the truth table is where the set scores exist, where the set membership eventually reflected, and you're able to, it's where you actually reflect the truth values. And this time we're talking of figures. So the truth are translated into figures and values, and eventually run. So these are based on the inclusion and exclusion of sets. So we need to theorize which values in the raw data set translate into which membership score. So this is the basis of the truth table. And we will see a bit of it, how this runs. Accordingly, we could also call this theory-guided calibration, because then you calibrate based on, you don't leave out theory. As in qualitative studies, you must always interact with theory and literature when you are doing yours. So this picks from the elements of qualitative studies to interact with theory and literature. You must, it's a requirement. So for theory-guided calibration, we record values of the raw variables by grouping. So you group according to conditions established or guided by theory. So you group your cases, your conditions, based on the guidance of theory. And some of this, depending on the theory applied, I would give an example, but I know that we are all very good in this territory of theory, theoretical analysis, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. A good area of applying the recording method is when we use the Likert scale. There you are recording. And you know that when you're establishing your tool, your instrument, and you're getting your scales, you rely on theory, you rely on literature, your conditions must speak to theory. That's the requirement. So once you have this Likert scale and your instrument, data collection instrument speaking to theory, then this is already by default answered. You're guided by theory. So most important, and this is the practice everywhere, we normally have to rely on the theory to guide. Then the calibration of the fuzzy sets, it will require at least 3 qualitative anchors. So fuzzy logic requires a 0, the midpoint or crossover point, and then the full one. Full one is normally 1. The anchors at 0.5 establishes the difference in kind. Either you belong or you are excluded, included or excluded. We can record the index of a fuzzy set as follows. As you recall, as you may note that this may simply speak to your Likert scale. If you look at in your conceptual setup of the Likert scale, in the mind you can look at it and say, assuming I have 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, implying that this category is strongly agree, which means fully in. So when your questionnaire is marked and given you results as 6 mark, you are already creating truth values. 5, you're saying agree. 4, maybe say not sure. So you are either more in or than out, something on nature, but not this one does not indicate the anchor point. That's why there's more out than in, more in than out. Then 2 is more out. It's more of a 0. So you can realize that this is between 0 and 1. So you're putting your tooth values. So whatever outcome you get from your Likert scale, you will be able to straight away align it with your tooth table. And the tooth values straight away speak to your Likert scale. The moment you speak to this and you have developed your tooth table, then you're good to go and run it with the R's. Implement the operators to implement, because the operators are supported by the R, but you need to appreciate what the operators will be saying, because then you may not want to run results and not be able to interpret them. So it depends on your scale. You can have a 5-point Likert scale, you can have a 7-point Likert scale. We shall see what the scholars say. There are a summary table that we shall give the operations that analysis. Then the different calibration method of fuzzy sets. Sometimes we want fuzzy sets to reflect very refined grained continuous difference in degree. And according to Ragin, because this scholar is more critical in the establishment of the qualitative comparative, the QCA methodology. And actually has a book. At a later time, towards the end of the session, we shall send you the book on the group. That's the original book on QCA. And it deals with 2 methods, the direct and indirect calibration methods. Now, the calibration methods are more formalized and rely on statistical models. Because we shall get, there's also actually a formula to having this calibration running. So we'll see this towards the second last slide of today's session. Then the choice of anchors based on existing theory and substantive knowledge. So knowledge is important. Don't choose an area to test your where you are not knowledgeable. Very good for you to understand. So we need to test your DV where you are knowledgeable. Deal with grouping calibration method, which is the most applied. This is the most applicable and the one I'm also interested in using. This requires raw data and refined grained numerical scale, and it deals with the Likert scale values. It calibrates the set based on Likert scale. That's why I'm interested in. It's easier to deploy. The calibration method uses criteria external to the data at hand. So you need to have some knowledge about the case you are studying. Specify 3 different anchors. So I have 1, 0, and 0.5 as a crossover. So the crossover establishes this one I've already explained. So we choose the crossover point such that no empirical cases in the data set end up having a set value of exactly that crossover point, because it will be redundant. We have emphasized this and we shall keep emphasizing it. You need to test your data to be sure that it's not skewed either below 0.5 entirely or above entirely. But if it's above, then you're lucky because it will be explaining the cause much faster, much easier. But if your data falls largely within this range, there's a literature and guidance to this. 20% of your data should not fall within this range, below or above this range, 20%. Once it's 20%, you risk to have spurious results. So you need to be careful on that. So cases with exactly 0.5 set members cannot conclusively be attributed to a truth table row. So you have kind of ambiguity in your results. The direct method then usually uses a logic function. This is where we apply the Boolean algebra, this logic function. And this is also, there's a function we have, it's like a formula of sorts, how it works to fit the raw data into this. So as you have, sometimes if you want, you can run it on R and it will give you the results, but it's good for you to appreciate what the logic function is, so that you don't run what the software runs and you're not sure what is happening. So the exclusive use of empirical features of the data, for instance, the mean, is less recommended when calibrating data. It's less recommended, but it is also acceptable. That's what it would imply. So you can, depending on how you've gotten your data, you possibly would want to generate means, but you do better if you don't have that applied. So in terms of, we've already addressed skewness and crossover points. So calibrating qualitative data. Now there are cases where you will have entirely qualitative data, where you go to the field and done interviews and observed and archival data, you deal with document review, and entire purely qualitative data. This methodology also enables you to and then you develop the truth table. So here, adherence to criteria is important. Procedure get the validity and important. And there is a detailed sample by these scholars. So different techniques. You need to want to calibrate the sets based on the qualitative data that exists. Now, the block and revise give guidelines on how to determine the set membership threshold of inclusion and exclusion. So if you wish, you may download this gentleman's works. You will possibly be happy to read through what the guides on how to calibrate purely qualitative data, other than the Likert scale and the like. So degrees of the set membership and the meaning of zero based on the qualitative. So the same people guide on the ways of presenting the calibration decisions and data and performing sensitivity analysis tests as well. Then good practice for calibration of qualitative data is that we need to have transparency. There should be a trail, and you just justify your choice of calibration anchors. And in detail, specifically the crossover point, because that is not necessarily the midpoint. So you need to justify and explain. Then make the data available once you've calibrated. Then calibration anchors criteria include should be motivated by criteria that are external to the institution knowledge, your knowledge and release theory. Theoretical is important. And empirical arguments are needed in order to determine which empirical evidence qualifies for set membership scores, depending on your anchor point. So how do we do the calibration diagnostics? We had already indicated this. You can do the diagnostics through different approaches. Either display diagrammatically and assess the skewedness of the scores, or there are other options. There are functions for detecting both of these problems. And these tools are particularly used with larger case data. Once you have cases above 100, or 200, or 3,000, or even 500 cases, you are able to easily test the skewedness of the data. If you have a few cases, you may not be able to determine the skewedness easily. And they rely on the direct method, the most applicable. In addition to these tools, visualize calibration using histograms. So you can visualize and scatter plots and see the distribution of your cases and data points. on a scatter plot or a histogram. And this is a standard in most of the research. You find it comes out. The data can be calibrated through the following three thresholds cutoff. 95 is a, as we noted, remember we said, it's not necessarily a midpoint. So you can have a threshold as high as 95, 0.5%. I mean 0.5 or 95, as opposed to just 0.5. You can also have a threshold at 0.05. So all these have their justifications. So this transforms data into the log odds metric, where all values will fall between 0 and. So once you set your threshold, your anchor points and the threshold, then your data is automatically transformed to log odds. This is the same implication of applying the logs in statistical analysis to normalize your data, so you don't have extreme values. That so here we apply the threshold, and definitely stabilizes your data. The log odds metric is established and falls between 0 and 1. So instead of applying it manually, you can decide to apply it once the software runs through. You're able to do that. So the other alternative is to use the median or mean to establish thresholds. Like we agreed earlier, you may decide to use the mean. Not most recommended, but it's okay. Decide to use the mean. For instance, assuming you have a specific condition. So how do you assign the truth value there? So you get a mean under those specific questions falling under the specific condition, and eventually assign a truth value. That's what this would imply. In the case of use of the popular 7-point Likert scale, for instance, strongly disagree, strongly agree. Previous studies suggest that threshold values that could be 6, 4, 2, the one we saw earlier, being the midpoint cutoff. For inclusion or exclusion could be adopted. Now, this 6 is not necessarily in the nomenclature of 0.0 and 1. So you remember what we had already seen, how the 0 to 1 values are set up based on this 642 threshold. In other words, you can decide to use a 2, and you look at the value that's assigned to 2 at the previous slides, and then get that as your threshold. You can decide to have it as 6, then see the threshold. And let's just remember that threshold, the midpoint, is not necessarily the mid of 0 and 1. It is your anchor point. It is your break. I think the statistical significance of sorts in statistical data, 95 or 10% significance levels, something of nature is what this implies. So it depends on this level of statistical significance you want to achieve. You choose accordingly. While the 5-point Likert scale could consider the thresholds of 4, 3, and 2, depending on the overall behavior of the data. So you may also have 5-point Likert scale. While this is a 7-point Likert scale, you may decide to have 5 points. But once you have 5-point Likert scale, you have 4, 2, 4, 3, 2 as your optional midpoint. Otherwise, in a 5-point scale, you would think 3 is automatically the midpoint. No, you may have 4, close to 5 as the midpoint, as your break even, as your state of ambiguity, depending on the skewness of your data and the scholar and the theory and the scholar you are following. you choose. A threshold may be raised above midpoint if the cases considered are few. So if there are few and you want to assess the real, that's the 95 or 99 significance levels, you will now raise it. We're raising it to say above 10 but below 50. So these are when the cases are above 10 but below 50 cases you are studying. So you raise the threshold above the 0.5. So remember, once the cases you are studying above 50 and on, you may decide to choose a code at your freedom. But it's advisable to have a midpoint above the the 0.5 if the cases are few. That is because according to fuzzy logic, the minimum cases you can study and arrive at useful results is 10 cases. Those are the minimum. However, between 10 and 50, those are the medium level study. You have 10 to 50 cases of analysis. Those give you good results. But if you decide to go macro scale, international, global, 50 cases, but it has no limit upward. It can go to 1,000 cases. And whichever way you decide to reach, it gives you that. So the beauty about it is that if you have an area where you have limited information, then you're still able to get good results based on a few cases, 10, and you're good to go. And the analysis will give you good results. But don't aim at the minimum. It's not normally good to aim at the minimum cases. So the reason for doing so is to increase the accuracy of the causal precision of the resultant configurations. So the reason for raising the midpoint is to increase the accuracy of the causal precision. You're being more precise once you have raised, you are challenging yourself too much. That's the midpoint. That's what you need. So it's provided in the table below. We'll look at this table briefly. So as you noted, as I indicated,
Hello? It's like we're having challenges with the... Hello? Members, is it my network or the presenter's network?
Including the Likert scale source data can fall within this.
No, he's not audible. I think he has challenges with the network on his
Okay,
side.
Bosco. Bosco?
It's actually having
Yes,
a
Professor.
problem.
Bosco,
Network
we
is
have, I
very
think your
clear.
network is unstable, but...
Or maybe I can change the...
Okay.
I don't know if this is okay, Prof. I don't know if that is much
Yes,
louder.
yes. Yeah, clear now.
Hello, Professor.
Yeah, it's okay now. Please.
Sorry. Hello, Prof.
Yes, I was saying that not much stable.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I think the phone had possibly had a problem. Okay, so...
Put in a presentation mode, yes.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So we're saying we have this type of data where you collected your data using Likert scale and all other type of data. You are free to use these thresholds in line with the works of this. And I recall telling you that Ragen is one of the authorities that is very well known in establishing the QCA methodology. And so we have got this as a full. So once a scale or a case or case member has scored 95 and above, is when it is it is justified to be labeled as 1. If it scores 50, it's intermediate. So it's like a break-even point. So it is in a state of midpoint. Then 5% becomes the full set non-membership. It's outside the set membership. So this is 95, so you can transform this into between 0 and 1. So 95% would be 0.95. And then this would be 0.5, then this 0.05. So we would be able to get this. Now, the 7 Likert point sourced data, you need to apply this kind of threshold in line with the works of Papaz et al. in 2020. And then all types of data when skewed, either to the right or left, or examples include the Likert scale source data, clickstream, depending, assuming you are studying how many times someone has clicked your advert online. Those are the click stream, the streaming of the clicks on the advert. User performance or psychological data, among others. Then it's advisable that you use this 80 as the threshold of full membership. 50 intermediate and 20 out. And these are still in line with the works of this gentleman. And they all have good works online. If you check out on Elsevier, you'll find Papaz and Ragen's works quite dominating, and so many others. So then we have skewness. To make meaningful comparisons, the condition and outcome sets should reflect the diversity and heterogeneity of the cases chosen for analysis. So you don't want to say all my cases, assuming I'm studying biofuel, assuming I take an example of my study area, biofuels. Now I get 90% of my cases from bioethanol. It means then I will have skewed my analysis. There is no heterogeneity, there is no diversity. I need to balance of the data. Ones I've got from biogas, I should get from bioethanol, biodiesel, a few, and also such cases. So it ensures that sets are calibrated to avoid being overly skewed. The rule of the sum already indicated to you is that you need up to 20% of cases to be more than the midpoint. No should less than 20% cases be more than out in. So outside is the out of the midpoint. So even if a given crossover point makes such sense theoretically, make comparison in order to avoid overly skewed states. So you need to take note of that. So you restructure the set so that it becomes easier for a case to be a member of the set. So your calibration comes back to be critical at this stage in calibration. And then changing the calibration might require the relabeling of the sets. So just like in any qualitative study, for instance, you need to navigate back and forth from theory to back to your data, and from data back to the field. It's the same. You always be trying to do the same. Back to theory, back to data, back to literature, back to data, and sometimes go to the field again until it speaks sense. So cases on crossover points, point of maximum ambiguity. We already said that during calibration, we check whether there are empirical cases on the crossover point. So when you're doing calibration, you do that first. Avoid setting the crossover point on a value that is populated by one or more empirical cases. So when you're setting the crossover point, you don't want to put it in just to knock off most of your data. So based on the guidance of the previous scholars, you may be able to set the crossover point. So combining sets, once we have attributed cases to sets, we're looking at the various forms of combining them. So this one taps into the patterns, complexity studies. And this is the heart of the QCA. So once you've combined these sets, these cases, is now to determine the patterns. So how do we combine? Combination follows the logic, fuzzy logic, the operating logic, and the logical operators are and, or, and not. So this detects the conjunctions of conditions, the issues of intersection, and more of conjunctions. These are the intersections of conditions, the equifinality. These are like multiple ways to arriving at a solution. Then asymmetry, remember we had already reminded ourselves on the symmetrical causation. An asymmetrical causation, for instance, assuming you're saying price of a good is determined by the cost. Now, when you reduce the cost of production, the price of the good would reduce. That's not the way this one applies. Asymmetrical causation means once you reduce the cost of production, the price will remain. So the question is, what makes the price remain the same? There are other factors. And that's what this. So it's not necessarily the increase or reduction of one factor will reduce the outcome. No, that is symmetrical causation, which is more in the statistical studies, the normal regression and statistical studies. So this is the beauty of these tests, more than the symmetrical setup of the analysis. And then you have equifinality and conjunctions. Conjunctural causation. That's why it's called conjunctural. That's one is where it derives its assumption. The assumption is conjunctural causation. It is derived from the word conjunction, which is more of the intersection patterns. It builds into that. So we seek to determine the conjunctions. And how do we arrive at that? We use these operators, Boolean operators, to arrive at that. So we shall see how these Boolean operators work subsequently. So we will get to logic operations. So let's do just a bit of an example of how by set illustration. If we use 3 logical operators to combine sets according to this gentleman, the logical and, logical or, and logical not. This is the logical and, because we want this intersection, the excellent performance that explains the existence. So this is the sufficiency we are looking out for. The most outstanding in the model for all the classes. So as you know, this is the outside, the class is the not, the out. This is the union if we combine all this. So the union is the O, is designated by a plus, while and is designated by a multiplication sign. When we are now coding the coding data for running in the software, then not is designated by kind of a negative, a dash or something on nature. You will see it subsequently. So the logic O is the union. So all is combined. Logic not is what is outside the set. What does not is what it implies. Whereas this constitute, what does not constitute is also what we're interested in. That's why we test for presence and absence. So this is the presence of the outcome of interest, and this is the absence. So we test for the absence. So normally this one tests for both, and you test the two at the same time, so that you're able to see the patterns, what conditions cause the presence, what conditions cause the absence of a specific outcome. So our interest is to know the membership of the sets that are excellent, as you see in the excellent component, the intersection. That's now where the sufficient conditions come to play. The logical and speaks the membership of the case in the combined sets, while logical and operators, also called Boolean multiplication, intersection, conjunctions, takes the minimum value across sets. So we deal with minimum values in your truth table. And it's normally denoted by this. Once you see that, you're dealing with and, or in other words, you're telling us you want to determine the intersection or the conjunction, or simply are saying we're multiplying the two sets. So we call this rule the minimum rule, minimum rule, because we try to minimize. We remove, in other words, we're trying to remove all the redundancies that exist in the model to arrive at the sufficient model. So we are dealing with minimum rule, minimizing at the level we can afford to get the best. It's like distilling, we're distilling our model to arrive at the most critical. So this is more accumulation assumption. Then we could also be interested in the set memberships that are either good or perform well. The operations invoked is the O. Now this O is the similar as the plus, this plus the other. And in other words, as you remember, I said this O indicates the union of sorts. So we deal with plus this, plus the other. So what's in totality, what does there? And that gives us more of the necessary conditions. Logical OR also operates as an addition or union or disjunction, or takes the disjunction because they are not joint anymore. They are not intersections. So it's more of a union set. Takes the maximum. So the maximum value cross sets and is denoted by a plus. So all combination is disjunction or union of the different component sets. Maximum rule, because it maximizes, help us calculate the membership cases in the combination. The membership of the cases, a disjunct of a set always equals the biggest membership score in the component set. Biggest, total, the union, the maximum in the component set. And as a rule, the membership of cases is the negation set. The negated set is always 1 minus their membership in the set. So you are looking at for those that are not in. Those that are, so that's why the minus comes into play. From this, we derive the rule of excluded middle. I remember we indicated to you earlier what's the excluded middle. That there is no element that can simultaneously be a member of both sets. Excluded middle, you cannot be in both. So you in the middle, you are redundant. You can't be in both absent and present. So the rule of excluded middle brings in the negation. There is no element that can simultaneously together at the same time be a member of both a set and its negation. You cannot belong, and as well as it's the same adage that you cannot eat your cake and have it. You cannot belong as well as be absent. That's the rule of the excluded middle. And that's where the negation comes in. So this rule applies to crisp sets only. Why? Because crisp sets as clear as there is no middle. For them, they say you are either there or you are not there. So it's either 0 or 1. This is the rule of excluded middle. There is no middle in this. So it's applying only to crisp sets. However, the rule of excluded middle does not apply to fuzzy sets. Why? Because we are dealing with degrees of truth. How we are seeing the refined grained data that we need to assess the degrees of belongingness, inclusion or exclusion of a specific data set or case or condition from the activity. So the degrees of membership. That's why they excluded this rule does not apply, because this deals with extremes only, it doesn't have the middle. This integrates part of the middle, the degrees. As you go from the middle towards the full membership, you will apply the degrees. So intersection is not empty. So this means that the fuzzy sets a case that can be attributed qualitatively to either a set or its negation. The only exception is when a case holds a fuzzy set membership score of 0.5, the same. This is a redundant point. So basic rules for applying logical operations. Now there are there are two. One most important one is the De Morgan's law. This rule simply suggests that to calculate negation, once you've calculated the presence, now to calculate the absence of the same conditions, then you just reverse the operators, just reverse the application. Instead of saying, once you're reversing, you just say and becomes O. You reverse, then O becomes and. So that automatically reverses and gives you the negation, the absence. And the present sets are negated. It becomes automatically negated. So you'll be able to test the absence of that specific condition or outcome. And then when we deal with this kind of Boolean operators, there are three rules that we apply. Well, these are more the set. Those of us who are familiar with the sets at S4, S2. The commutativity rule that the order in which elements appear in conjunction or disjunction is not important. So order is not important. However, whichever way they appear is. Then the associativity rule that if we perform the same operation or several sets, the sequence of these operations is not important. So sequence is also not an issue. Then the distributivity rule, and this is that when the and or operators are used in the same logical operations, we can then factor out elements. So here, distributivity rule enables us to factor out elements that never eventually give us the ultimate model, because we shall factor out redundant elements or common elements and then get the most distilled or efficient model. So negation logical knot is denoted by this. This is the negative I was telling you about, but it's not negative. Some scholars put it as a dash, but it's applicable in this. And even when the model is written, it should be able to show in that. I don't know the name of this, but just note what it means. That's the sign that indicates absence or logical knot or negation. So once you see the membership in the set none is indicated this way, it means it's the absence or the negative of it. It's limited, less, or absent, or inadequate, or insufficient. You do this. So when we are interpreting and discussing the results, we now don't say absent, just you deploy all those elements of insufficient, inadequate, less important. All this is what it means. So it's calculated by 1 minus the condition X. So it's the negation, the other. So the truth table, let's summarize this in the next few seconds. I think 10 minutes should do. The fuzzy set analysis is based on the truth values that are designated based on case membership values in the respective sets. This one will be emphasized. Each causal condition is in a set of conditions that explaining the outcome. So what's important, we recall that we have causal conditions. Those are the similar, in statistical studies, you look at them as indicators of a variable. Those are the conditions we're talking about, the causal conditions. And then a minimization operator is used to calculate configurations of membership more precisely. Minimization operators, we have just seen them, the and, or, and, not, logical not. So the analysis in summary, we will be doing most part of this conceptually maybe the next session, if God willing. We can run through a few highlights on how to analyze. Then analysis, the step one, we write down the logical possible combinations of conditions in order to identify sets that pass the criterion of being sufficient conditions of outcome Y. So this is done by software, or you can do it manually, but manually it can only be done if you have very few cases, like 10 minimum. Then the rows of the truth table consist of logically possible combinations. Now the combinations range between if you want to know the total number of rows, it is normally 2 to the power k. And this k reflects conditions are, for instance, 3. If the conditions, so k is the conditions. So normally the formula is 2 to the power k. So if you have 3 conditions, then you will be able to know the number of rows by that formula. The truth table will consist. Step 2, for each case, determine the truth table row to which it belongs. Each row is then either considered sufficient or not. The truth table is summarized via the process of logical minimization. We have gone through it. In general, it holds that the closer the case membership is to 0.5 anchor, the more ambiguous it is. We already discussed that. It increases the ambiguity of the statement made about the set 3. For each truth table row, determine if it contains enough empirical evidence. So we seek to ask which rows contain enough empirical evidence. Now the beauty about this is that once you run in the software, the data gives you analysis of the row, how the rows are performing, how the whole case, all the data is performing. So you have assessment per row. You will be able to know which row. By that case, you are saying which case is performing how in the analysis. So it generates that automatically. But it will be good for you to do it manually also to be able to appreciate how the software is operating on the back. Enough empirical evidence as at least one case must hold a membership of higher than 0.5. So if in your analysis, you generated all cases holding 0.5 and below, then your evidence is not empirically strong, it's not enough. Meaning that there must be at least one case that represents this truth table row in empirical terms. The frequency of cases above which the truth table row is considered to have enough empirical evidence is also called frequency cutoff. We shall also get to see this. It is also provided in the results once generated. So you're able to see a frequency cutoff as well. Then 4, the truth table rows that contain enough empirical evidence determine whether they are sufficient for the outcome or not. Here you need to ask the question, which of these rows are sufficient for the outcome and which ones are not? Because then you'll have got results for each row from your data, from your software. Then that is from the table, the truth table. Once you've run it, the truth table has different rows. So each row will give you the results, how it performs. So which row is a subset of the outcome? And remember, we had touched that in the last session when we discussed issues of subsets. So you're able to detect whether that's sufficient condition or not. These rows are called contradictory truth table rows, in which the combination of condition leads to both to the occurrence and the non. So these are the outliers that normally often occur in the analysis. And they are called counterfactuals. Sometimes they are outliers. No, they are not counterfactuals. Counterfactuals will be outliers on their own. They don't speak to the theory. They don't speak to literature. It's up to you now to explain why. And if it is justifiable, justify. Sometimes we use simplifying assumptions to explain, to link it, to explain why. But these ones are contradictory. These are speaking to contradictions. So these contradictions you need to deal with in the analysis. So we deal with them. There are also ways of dealing with this to resolve. So to resolve these contradictions, we go back to research design and see the case selection and calibration and conditions and reconceptualize the outcome. So involving a back and forth dialogue between theory and evidence. This is still what was essential at the beginning. So researchers can resort to parameters of fit and check for deviant cases consistency. So deviation is not a problem. Deviation is good because it will give you the basis for which to become a unique subscriber to the literature. you may get a deviant case that is giving you an outlier status or a counterfactual. In this case, you will now be able to explain based on the conditions on the ground. But sometimes you may decide to apply simplifying assumptions. You assume this happened and you explain why. So for each row, calculate the parameters of fit. Now this consistency and PRI are part of your validity and tests. There's content validity, and then I remember this was discussed at the last. So validity and reliability were discussed at the about 2 weekends or 3 weekends ago. So I don't want to take you back to that detail, but we also touched that. So it's important for you to assess this particularly. And we had addressed this at the last meeting, but I will try and recap this during the analysis. We shall try and recap this during the analysis, because this is part of the assessment of your level of coverage and consistency of data. And check the deviant cases and consistency in kind. So the truth table rows that fail our sufficient test obtain the value 0 in the column of the output. Okay, so I'm still thinking you need to note this area quite well, consistency and this, because this in full stands for proportional reduction in inconsistency. So you want to try to reduce inconsistency, so that your consistency is assured. So this gives you a state of assurance of your results. Once you have a good value out of PRI, then you are speaking well about your results. The consistency level above which rows are considered sufficient is also called the consistency threshold. So that one is, so let's finally look at the minimization, about two slides. Then we wind up today's session, Professor and members. So here, logical minimization, in essence, the truth table represents the answer to the question, which conditions are sufficient for the outcome? That's your underlying operation of the truth table. So we are looking at for sufficient conditions for the outcome. Sufficient are those that are most distilled, most relevant, most required for this outcome to exist. So the answer is all truth tables, all truth table rows with a value 1 in column output is normally the ideal. We can write this answer in Boolean operators. Now the model will come out written in this kind of abstract language, but we have already gone through it and we know what this means. It means the absence of conditions X, A, and C, plus the presence of conditions this, plus the presence of condition. Once you don't see this sign, it means it has to be present. Once this sign exists, it indicates the absence. It's a complement. The absence, it's a negation. So these are conditions, then negation, absence of this plus this. So together cause the outcome Y. So this means it causes the outcome. The Boolean operators here are and, this one is O, so the and is applicable to this multiplication. You multiply this and that, added to this multiplication of, so it's both. Even the logical note is applied because you note that there is logical note. So here we are now going towards getting to the direction of the model. It's just an illustration. It contains elements that are not needed for our term. That's as you realize. And this is where we come in to factor out the some of the common factors while minimizing. This is not minimized. So to minimize this, we shall eliminate the redundant conditions. And as you note, just to give you a clue, if, for instance, we have this, as in your elementary mathematics, if you multiply, if you add a -1 plus a +1, it brings us to 0. So this dies off. So we are minimizing by default. So this automatically, you cannot have, this is the rule of exclusion. You cannot have both exist in the same conditions, present as well as same time absent. It cannot be both present and absent. And in another case, they cancel out automatically. That's the minimization we're talking about. We will get to that. So we get rid of them via the process of logical minimization. So this is the logic of minimization. 2 steps. First, we eliminate the redundant conjunctions from all primitive expressions and yield the prime implicants. So the primitive expression is as we've seen. Then second, we eliminate logical redundant prime implicators and identify the prime implicators. What are those that exactly cause? So consider 2 primitive expressions, this and this. Both lead to y, and they are identical to each other, except for the value of one conjunct. So the value of one conjunct is in one, C is present, and in the other, C is absent. Should have written this as not absent. Sorry, that's an error. So meaning that as long as cases are members of these conditions, their membership in condition C is relevant for explaining the outcome, because then C and C cancel out. Therefore, the logical expression, when you minimize this plus this, will yield the outcome. This becomes this, because then you'll have cancelled out some of this and it leads you to now XA leading, causing Y. You cancelled out the C's, they automatically cancel. So you follow the same logic. So here we were trying to minimize to arrive at the most distilled model that can explain all solutions. So there are various solutions, as we remember telling you. There are complex solutions, intermediate solutions, and a parsimonious solution. This method generates all the 3 at the go. But our interest is the intermediate or parsimonious. But depending on your analysis and your interest, you can decide to go and choose and explain and justify why you chose complex against the intermediate solution of parsimonious. Now, each of those has its own explanation, as we had dealt with last meeting. So we shall deal with it subsequently. When we run the data, we'll be able to see the output of a parsimonious and intermediate and then complex solutions and why they are so. There are now only 3 sufficient terms, and each consists of 2 rather than 3 conjuncts. So 3 sufficient sums. So in other words, you can decide to have an X plot for the solution. You can also test this to assess creating an XY plot for the solution. That reveals which cases are left unexplained. These are now the counterfactuals, the outliers. These cases are in the upper quadrant and called deviant cases. They're deviant, they are deviating from theory and literature. They're deviant, they are not speaking to what theory is saying. So we have to explain why. So sometimes you may decide to create detailed discussion on it. So this is the second last slide. Professor and members, we have evaluating the relationship when evaluating the relations of inclusion and exclusion, this is the model, the formula we take, we consider, we minimize, we try to achieve the minimization of these conditions to arrive at the outcome. But it's a summation. That's why we have a truth table. It's a summation of those conditions. And then you get the proportion to arrive at the proportion of that condition that arrives at the outcome. So the presentation of the ratio of the sum of the cases, the intersection, meaning that it seeks to define the extent to which the outcome exceeds the causal conditions. That means causal conditions are a subset of the outcome. That's when it becomes sufficient condition. Recall, to obtain the final solution of the model, we evaluate respects to its coverage. So the coverage is like the sense, as we indicated last time. These are also provided in the analysis. The software will generate the coverage and to give you in terms of values between 0 and 1. And these values speak to the strength, the explanatory power of the conditions. How are they able to explain the cause of the outcome? It's the same as the R square almost in regressional studies, as we had said last time. This R squared and the like. The coverage shows the outcome variable and is covered by its predictors. And it will be computed as follows based on this. So this is the coverage of this and that to get you. So it's just about almost the same, but you note that this is the proportion in regard to the coverage of the two conditions. So we will be able to apply this. There are more other equations that come before this, but I didn't want to clutter the slides, so we kind of arrived at the ultimate, but normally there are about 3 or 4 others that come before to arrive at that. So finally, for purposes of those interested in the software, I remember this question came out last week, so we picked out summarized a few of this. This is the dedicated software, FSQC software, version 3.0. It's there in the internet, available, free. Then you have the RQCA version this, RQCA, and then Stata fuzzy version this. So what means Stata can as well run fuzzy logic. It can run this and get your results. So professor and members, we were believing we could close this for this session. We could end at this session, sorry. And then maybe next, if we have an opportunity next weekend, we could do how to analyze the necessary conditions and then test the goodness of it, or strength of the set relations. How do we measure the consistency? Then how do we determine the relevance, empirical relevance or strength or coverage of the conditions? Then what parameters of fit exist and parameters of fit sufficiency? Then how do we deal with the weird cases? And then possibly give a clue of how the post-analysis should be handled if possible. Professor, I note that this is what we shared with Professor Ntai and guided on, and we could be able to, if he's on, he could give his remarks. Now, if he's not still indisposed, maybe I yield back the floor to you, Professor Okocha.
Okay, thank you so much, Bosco. And members, I pray that you join me and appreciate Bosco for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Bosco and Professor. Now, I think Bosco, you will have to share with us the presentation. And I believe each and every person at their own time, they can be able to reflect And I know by next week, I think you did 2 presentations. There was first one last Sunday, then this one. But thank you so much. I know the presentation has generated a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts, which actually can lead to questions or observations. But allow me to acknowledge some of our senior colleagues who joined us. Then we can go into the questions. I want to acknowledge Dr. Ahmad Walgembe. Thank you so much. Dr. Goretti, Chione, and then Dr. Isaac Newton Kayongo. We also have Dr. Hassan Bashir. You're welcome. Now, I think like Sylvia has highlighted, it's a very interesting methodology, which will really help us to really come up with a profound finding. There are some times when you really see that the method which has been used for analysis doesn't clearly come up with the critical issues as envisaged in the study area. But I really think that I believe that this approach really, when properly understood, will strengthen research and the approach. So I want at this time again to invite comments. There was somebody who in the chat room who had wanted you to explain slide 25. I don't know. But let me invite some comments from the different members, please.
Professor, maybe to explain that slide 25 again.
Yeah, somebody had asked the question that, can you explain slide 25? So maybe make it in the presentation mode, and then somebody will can be able to understand it better.
Slide 25 is running out.
That was Dennis.
Okay, so Prof. Dennis, Dennis, we're looking at. We had initially indicated that in applying the minimization logic, we deal with 3 logical operators, and these operators include the logical AND, logical OR, and logical NOT. These are the logical operators in Boolean algebra. If you deal with Boolean algebra, if you could possibly look through it at your free time, you'll be able to appreciate what these entail. So what the logical AND implies is the intersection. The intersection, logical AND, is like in the set theory, you're dealing with the elements within this intersection. And this is ideally what we need most, because it explains the entirety of the whole set. Once we have the intersection, it is the sufficient condition ultimately that we are looking out for. The logical AND, where the conditions combine, where they intersect to explain the outcome. But this is so logical AND is the same as you multiply, sometimes designated in the logical Boolean algebra by a multiplication or by the word intersection. So you could have, or conjunction. So you could have all that to explain the same intersection. So this slide simply gives only an overview of the logical and, while the next slide gives an overview of the logical or, then the other slide gave the overview of the logical not. So it's just the start of explaining the logical operations, how the three logical operators that we deploy in arriving at the minimum model and the sufficient conditions. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment? Any other comment? Any other comment? Okay, I think Bosco, you'll have to get the either through the platform. You share with us the slides, the first one, the first presentation, and the second one. I know a lot of discussions will be done, especially when people reflect further. I don't know, is there any comment from senior colleagues? Dr. Gideon. Dr. Gideon. Dr. Goretti. Okay. Yes. Dr. Goretti, please. Let's say unmute the mic, please.
I just appreciate Comrade for the good presentation, and this is an intriguing approach worthy trying out. And I'm looking forward to the next session to see the hands-on in the app. I think that will bring the whole concept home for us to appreciate and also be able to think of applying. It's a good method so far from the presentations made for last week and today. So I just want to thank Comrade and the Professor on this initiative.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Koche, for moderating the session. Hope I'm clear.
Yes, we get you clearly.
One, to my colleagues, learning continues. Every now and again, we pick up a new approach and methodology of doing things. And to me, I think this is very important. It makes you more versatile and ability to use a number of tools. To the students, I think those of you who have already moved with your different methodologies, don't get confused that, now I learned this and then you move up to this, you switched from this to this. To me, I think that may not work, but this is something you may get to know about, the full set theory, and then you can use it thereafter in your publications. But learning is taking place. Every now and again, we learn a new methodology of analyzing data. Members should get to know that one of the areas I think that has been giving people some little bit of problem is analyzing qualitative data. And I think physicists adds on a number of other methodologies that are available in analyzing qualitative data. We thank you, Comrade Bosco, for that wonderful presentation and mastering the subject very, very well. Thank you very much for also being able and ready to share your knowledge, and also Professor for the platform, and also for spearheading this methodology and philosophy to be used by your students and colleagues. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Michael.
Okay, thank you so much. Looking from the, I think a lot of learning has taken place, and but before maybe we finally conclude with a prayer also. Is there any comment from a student? Any comment from one of the participants? Okay. Like there's no comment. So again, Bosco, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And I still request that you share with the participants those presentations. I believe it will help people to understand more. And then also you find that as people reflect through the week, they will be in position to ask more insightful questions. But honestly, this has been a wonderful time. We have learned and appreciate. And of course, the learning process is continuous. Thank you so much. And members who are still present, I still want to share with you something brief about a conference which I talked last time. I think I've shared in the platform. I'm part of the people organizing for that conference, and we believe that the conference will take place on the 1st and 2nd of December, like I was saying last time. It will be in Silver Springs, Bugorobi, and those are the different sub-themes. You can further revisit the brochure. And also, we are going to have a PhD colloquium for the first day before the real conference time. And the PhD colloquium, especially for the PhD students, will be critical to help us look at different challenges which the PhD scholars are facing. So the timelines are there. So what I invite most of you, the senior colleagues, you can be able to submit papers. The PhD students also, we can submit papers. And we are going to identify key scholars across who will be able to support the different tables. So I believe that if you look at in the WhatsApp groups, the call is there, and actually we shared most of you. So we also invite ideas on how best we could be able to manage this conference. But those are the dates. So you actually have an opportunity of presenting a paper in the area of service delivery, research, methodology, monitoring and evaluation. So methodologies like this, actually, Bosco should be preparing a paper in this area, really being able to bring out critical issues, issues on technology and innovation, human capital development, business development, governance, both industrial revolution, oil and gas, renewable energy, and industrialization in Africa. And so many participants from different parts of the world have expressed interest of being able to take part, even within Africa and Asia. We have received so many people who really, so we are looking forward that we see a war participating in this fourth conference. And abstracts will be, the end of receiving abstracts will be by 30th of September. And we have had quite some discussions with Professor Joseph Ntai, Professor Laura, Dr. Ahmad, and we are really looking at this could really build on this very platform where, again, we now meet physically. And actually, most times we could even meeting, like, I think yesterday I was doing some work and I met one of the students, and we are able to this is even Dr. Nkurunziza. So I think this could provide us with an opportunity of, again, meeting physical and see how to advance scholarship. So I think more issues we can be able to discuss, but as we conclude, I want to invite again Dr. Goretti to close with a word of prayer. Thank you.
Maybe before
and also
Dr.
pray for
Goretti.
Professor that he recovers soon. Thank you.
Prof, I just want to thank you and thank Professor for guiding us to this methodology and for the mentors on the forum for your comments. I thank you so much. And for the colleagues who are still logged on, we appreciate your presence is motivating. We appreciate you so much. Thank you, Professor, for this evening, for this good morning.
Okay, let us pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, I want to thank you so much for such a wonderful time of meeting together as scholars who are pursuing to get to understand more things as we help humanity. I pray that, Lord, you continue protecting us and guiding us. Father, I want to thank you so much for Professor Joseph Ntai, for his leadership, for his mentorship, for all the attributes. And Lord, we pray that you give him quick recovery. And we thank you. We pray for all of us that, Lord, even as we start this week, you keep on guiding us and protecting us. We pray all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Wish you all the best.